The dollar is dying, no, not in a single dramatic collapse, not in a thunderclap that wakes you up at 3 in the morning, but quietly, methodically, with the kind of cold precision that only a nation playing a thousand-year chess game would understand. And right now, China is sitting across that board from America, and they are not bluffing. They are not posturing. They are executing. While Washington is locked in its endless culture war theater, while cable news fills your screen with political noise and partisan outrage, Beijing has been doing something that every single American should be watching with absolute alarm. China has been systematically unwinding its position in U.S. treasuries, dropping from the largest sovereign holder of American debt to the third largest, now sitting at roughly $759 billion, down from over $1.3 trillion at its peak. And at the exact same time, it has been moving that capital, that leverage, that financial firepower directly into gold, real gold, physical gold, the kind of asset that cannot be frozen, cannot be sanctioned, cannot be digitally seized by an executive order signed in Washington. The People's Bank of China has now extended its gold buying streak to 17 consecutive months, and this is not coincidence, and it is not routine reserve management. This is a declaration. And if you are an American who cares about the purchasing power in your wallet, the stability of your savings, and the future your children are going to inherit, then you need to sit down and pay very close attention to what is unfolding right now. Let me be direct with you, because that is what this moment demands. What China is doing is not new. What makes it new is the scale, the acceleration, and the timing. Beijing has been patient, remarkably patient. For decades, they watched how America weaponized the dollar. They watched how Washington could, with the stroke of a pen, cut entire nations off from the global financial system. They watched what happened to Iran. They watched what happened to Venezuela. And then in 2022, they watched something that changed everything. They watched the United States and its European allies freeze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank assets overnight. That moment, the freezing of Russian central bank assets in 2022 following the invasion of Ukraine, is widely referenced in financial literature as a catalyst for reserve diversification discussions among major emerging market central banks. Beijing looked at that and said very quietly, very deliberately, that could be us. And from that moment forward, the Chinese strategy shifted into a higher gear that it has not come down from since. Now, here's where it gets deeply important for American audiences to understand, because the mainstream financial press in this country tends to either dismiss this story or reduce it to something abstract and academic. They talk about it in terms of percentages and basis points and reserve allocation ratios as if it is a dry technical matter that belongs in a footnote. But this is not a footnote. This is the headline of our era. China's approach is methodical and patient, and that is what makes it significant, because it is not waiting for a crisis to unfold. It is preparing in advance by building a reserve base that can withstand a loss of confidence in sovereign debt markets. Think about that for a moment. China is not reacting to a crisis. China is building a fortress before the storm arrives. That is the posture of a nation that believes the storm is coming and wants to be on the right side of it when it does. And the numbers are staggering when you actually sit down and look at them honestly. China's gold ETF market alone experienced a landmark year in 2025, with cumulative inflows totaling 110 billion yuan, the equivalent of over 15 billion US dollars, and total assets under management for domestic gold ETFs skyrocketed by 243%. That is not a blip. That is not a seasonal fluctuation. That is a structural, society-wide pivot toward gold as the preferred store of value. And it is happening at every level, from the Chinese central bank all the way down to ordinary Chinese citizens who are buying small bean-shaped gold bars because they no longer trust the paper alternatives. China's holdings of U.S. treasuries have fallen to approximately $683 billion, the lowest level since 2008, while the People's Bank of China has accumulated gold reserves for 15 consecutive months, pushing total holdings to around 2,300 tons by early 2026. The direction of travel could not be more obvious, and it could not be more consequential. Now, let us bring Donald Trump into this, because you cannot talk about this story in 2026 without talking about the man sitting in the Oval Office and the policies he is pursuing. Trump came back into power riding a wave of economic nationalism, tariffs, trade wars, America first. And on one level, some of that instinct is correct. There is a genuine problem with America's trade relationship with China. There is a genuine imbalance that has hollowed out the American industrial base over decades, and Trump is not wrong that something needed to change. But here is the brutal irony that almost nobody in Washington is willing to say out loud. The very tariff war that Trump has been waging against China may be accelerating the very outcome that would most damage American power. The recent tariff war, reignited in 2025 under President Trump, with tariffs reaching 145% on Chinese imports and 125% retaliatory tariffs from China, exposed the fragility of trade-linked monetary flows. Every escalation, every new round of tariffs, every hostile statement out of Washington gives Beijing another justification, another political cover, and frankly, another economic incentive to keep moving away from the dollar and deeper into gold. And here is the thing that should genuinely alarm every American, regardless of their political affiliation. The dollar's position as the world's reserve currency is not guaranteed by any law of nature. It is not written into the cosmos. It is a status that was earned through a combination of military power, economic credibility, institutional trust, and the sheer scale of American financial markets. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has slid to a two-decade low, and in central bank reserves, de-dollarization is unfolding in real time, with the share of gold increasing steadily, led by emerging market central banks. China, Russia, and Turkey have been the largest buyers in the last decade. That is not some fringe analysis from a Goldbug newsletter. That is J.P. Morgan. That is the institutional financial establishment of this country acknowledging what is happening. The dollar is losing ground. Slowly, yes, but steadily, and the trajectory is pointing in only one direction. What does this mean for you specifically? What does it mean for the average American family sitting in Ohio or Texas or Pennsylvania trying to figure out why their grocery bill keeps going up and why their savings do not seem to stretch the way they used to? It means that the hidden tax of dollar debasement, inflation, is not going away. It means that the privileges Americans have enjoyed because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, the ability to run massive deficits, the ability to borrow cheaply, the ability to print money without immediate consequences, those privileges are not permanent. Over the past several years, China has been reported to be reducing its holdings of U.S. treasuries, and simultaneously, China is actively pursuing the internationalization of its own currency, a strategy aimed at reducing over time the U.S. dollar's central role as the primary global reserve currency. And as that process continues, as more nations follow China's lead, the cost of America's debts goes up, the cost of imports goes up, and the standard of living for ordinary Americans faces a long-term structural pressure that no amount of domestic policy can fully offset. Let us talk about gold itself for a moment, because there is a profound piece of history embedded in this story that most Americans have never been taught. After World War II, the United States sat atop a mountain. It held roughly two-thirds of the world's gold reserves. The dollar was explicitly tied to gold. The Bretton Woods system made every other major currency in the world dependent on the dollar, and the dollar was supposed to be as good as gold. Then in 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar was untethered. The United States told the world, trust us, the dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the American government. And for 50 years, remarkably, the world mostly did trust that. But faith is not infinite. And the events of the last several years, the weaponization of the SWIFT system, the freezing of Russian assets, the explosion of American debt, the tariff chaos, have been eroding that faith in ways that are now measurable in the data. A comprehensive analysis covering the decade from 2015 to 2025 found that the average U.S. dollar share in total global reserves declined by 12%, while the gold share increased by 8%, representing one of the most significant shifts in reserve composition in the modern financial era. Beijing understands the history, Beijing has studied it, and Beijing has drawn a very specific lesson from it, which is this. In a world where the dominant power can unilaterally decide to freeze your assets, the only truly sovereign reserve is one that no foreign government controls. Gold cannot be frozen. Gold cannot be sanctioned. Gold does not depend on anyone's server, anyone's banking network, or anyone's permission. The Bank for International Settlements has noted in official publications that physical gold provides central banks with assets that cannot be subject to digital sanctions or remote asset freezes, unlike dollar-denominated holdings. This is not conspiracy theory. This is basic monetary logic, and China is applying it with ruthless efficiency while Washington argues about things that will matter far less in the long sweep of history. Now, some people in the financial establishment will tell you, and they are not entirely wrong, that the dollar still dominates, that the yuan is nowhere close to replacing it, that China's capital controls make the renminbi fundamentally unsuitable as a global reserve currency. China's yuan is unlikely to become a reserve currency anytime soon, given the extreme capital controls that its government places on the use of the yuan. That is true. But here is what those same establishment voices miss. China may not need the yuan to become the global reserve currency. That is not necessarily the goal. The goal may be something more subtle and more durable, to build a world where the dollar is merely one option among several, where America can no longer use financial access as a weapon with impunity, where the unipolar monetary moment that the United States has enjoyed since 1944 begins to give way to something more multipolar. And in that world, gold is not just a commodity. Gold is the foundation stone of a new monetary architecture that China is quietly laying, brick by brick, month by month, ton by ton. China announced in September that it plans to serve as custodian for foreign sovereign gold reserves, a move that could spur new central bank buying from emerging markets, seeking diversification and protection from sanctions, aimed at creating fresh demand and reflecting geopolitical strategy and a push for renminbi-driven de-dollarization. Let that sink in. China is positioning itself to hold the gold of other nations, to be the vault, to be the trusted custodian that, until now, London and New York have been. If that project succeeds, and there are dozens of nations in Africa, in the Middle East, and Southeast Asia that are watching it very carefully, the geopolitical implications extend far beyond finance. The nation that holds the world's gold holds a kind of power that transcends military force. You cannot bomb your way out of that kind of leverage. The Trump administration is aware of some of this. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has acknowledged the dynamics at play. Bessent noted in April 2025 that selling treasuries would ultimately hurt China's own economic interests, saying, if they sell treasuries, then they would have to buy RMBs, and it would strengthen their currency. And they've been doing just the opposite. And that is technically correct as a short-term tactical observation, but it misses the longer strategic picture entirely. China is not trying to crash America tomorrow. China is building the infrastructure for a world after American financial dominance. That is a 10-year project, a 20-year project, maybe a 30-year project, and they are perfectly willing to absorb short-term costs to achieve that long-term objective. Meanwhile, what is America doing? America is running deficits that are historically unprecedented in peacetime. America is carrying a national debt that is now well over $35 trillion and climbing. America is watching its political system produce gridlock after gridlock on the most basic fiscal questions. And American policymakers on both sides of the aisle are acting as though the dollar's reserve status is a permanent fact of life rather than a hard-won privilege that requires constant tending. That complacency is dangerous. That complacency is, historically speaking, exactly the kind of thing that precedes a great power's financial reckoning. Global central banks worldwide have been buying gold at one of the fastest paces in modern history, often exceeding 800 to 1,000 tons annually, while the dollar's share of global reserves has steadily declined from around 66% to roughly 57% over the past decade, 66% to 57%. That is 9 percentage points gone in a decade, and the pace is not slowing, it is accelerating. Every time Washington makes a decision that looks like financial coercion to the rest of the world, another country quietly updates its reserve strategy, another central bank places another gold order, another brick is laid in the foundation of the post-dollar world. What should Americans be watching? Watch where gold goes. Watch how many consecutive months China keeps buying. Watch whether other major economies, Saudi Arabia, India, Brazil, the Gulf states, continue to diversify away from the dollar. Watch whether the Shanghai Gold Exchange continues to expand its influence over global gold pricing, because whoever controls the price-setting mechanism for gold in a gold-centric reserve system controls an enormous amount of financial power. China promotes yuan-denominated gold trading through platforms like the Shanghai Gold Exchange, which not only strengthens China's influence over regional gold pricing, but also encourages trading partners to settle transactions in yuan. The ground beneath the global financial system is shifting. It is not shifting the way an earthquake shifts, violently, suddenly, with everything falling at once. It is shifting the way a continent drifts, slowly, imperceptibly in any given moment, but with a force and a direction that no individual actor can reverse. And when Americans finally look up from the political circus that dominates the daily news cycle, and when they ask where the power went and who moved it and how it happened without anyone stopping it, the answer will be found right here in these numbers, in this gold, in this patient, decades-long Chinese strategy that unfolded in plain sight while the most powerful country in the world was busy arguing with itself. The warning has been issued. Whether Washington and whether America has the wisdom to hear it and act on it in time is the defining question of this financial era.